A very warm welcome to the show, everyone. I'm Lynda Kinkade in for Issa Suarez. Tonight, US President Donald Trump touts the possibility of a second meeting on Ukraine. This time, one that could include both Ukraine and Russia. I'll discuss this with the Ukrainian member of parliament. Plus, Israel's military chief approves the main concept for a new attack plan in Gaza. We'll hear from the Palestinian ambassador to the UN. And a melting glacier sends a surge of water towards the capital of Alaska. We'll have a closer look at what's at stake. Well, 2 days before his summit with the Russian president in Alaska, Donald Trump is once again changing his tone and issuing a threat. The US president warns Moscow will face very severe consequences if Vladimir Putin doesn't agree to end the war in Ukraine. On Monday, Mr. Trump took a much less confrontational approach and said he's ready to walk away and say good luck if no progress is made at the talks. A short time ago, the president spoke to reporters, and while he wasn't clear on what the threat was, he said he's hopeful Friday's meeting could be followed by face-to-face talks that would involve the Ukrainian president.
If the first one goes okay, we'll have a quick second one. I would like to do it almost immediately, and we'll have a quick second meeting between President Putin and President Zelensky and myself if they'd like to have me there. And that would be a meeting where maybe it could be absolutely work. But the first meeting will not work that out. Certain great things can be gained in the first. It's going to be a very important meeting, but it's setting the table for the second meeting.
Well, earlier, President Trump was part of a virtual meeting with Volodymyr Zelensky and other European leaders. Mr. Zelensky says President Trump agrees that there must be a ceasefire before any security guarantees.
And I said about it to our European friends, to President Trump, that Putin definitely does not want peace. He wants to occupy Ukraine. And we all understand that Putin cannot fool anyone. We need future and further pressure and European and American sanctions against Russia.
Well, CNN's Betsy Klein is at the White House, while Nick Payton-Walsh joins us live from Kyiv. Good to have you both with us. I'll start with you first, Nick. So Donald Trump has spoken about the fact that there could be discussions about land swaps during this summit in Alaska with the Russian president. Talk to us about the concerns in Ukraine and the pressure they could feel to compromise.
Yeah, I mean, look, Ukraine has been clear since it first emerged from US Special Envoy Steve Witkoff's meeting with the Kremlin last week that potentially land swaps could be part of the thinking here, that it will not cede territory to Moscow. Moscow has taken significant amounts of eastern Ukraine through military force, but Ukraine's not going to give them more purely out of an exchange for a ceasefire, for a cessation of hostilities initiated by Russia. We have also heard from German Chancellor Friedrich Merz saying that legal recognition of areas occupied by Moscow is, quote, off the table. That's the Europeans clarifying that they don't want to have, as part of any sort of settlement here, the notion that the parts of Ukraine they've hived off are actually formal Russian territory, as Russia's constitution, amended since the invasion, now suggests. The question, though, of what could they swap? Well, look, Russia's taken lots of what it wants, but not the entirety of its maximalist goals. It could potentially give back tiny amounts of land up near Sumy and Kharkiv that is taken near the border that are of little consequence to it, but that's nowhere near comparable to the large amounts of Donetsk that it wants Ukraine to cede, or even the parts of Zaporizhia and Kherson it wants to cede as well. Zelensky also again today reaffirmed they will not be giving up the Donetsk region as part of talks here. Friedrich Merz, though, clear that he thinks there may be serious decisions made in Alaska, and we've seen in the last 24 hours the White House going from calling this a listening exercise to trying to pile pressure on the need for some kind of result, perhaps. Trump warning of very serious consequences, saying he would like to have a meeting, if it's possible, if the results go well with Putin, maybe a trilateral meeting between the Ukrainian, Russian and American presidents shortly after. Zelensky talked about the possibility of going to Alaska. He said there's talk of that particular meeting. Not clear he's been invited formally at all, or even clear what his travel plans are. Remember, it's a pretty long distance to get from where he is now in Berlin all the way across to the other side of the United States. But pressure clearly building. A European official I spoke to, familiar with the contents of the call between Trump and European leaders, said it was clear to them that the threat is on for secondary sanctions if Trump doesn't get what he wants out of that first Putin meeting. Remember, he has scheduled 2 weeks from now for sanctions against India to potentially kick in, a key customer of Russian energy. That could potentially damage both the Indian and Russian economies, India funding a lot of the Russian war effort. So a feeling potentially that those very severe consequences might actually be those secondary sanctions emerging, but a wider concern too potentially that Ukraine won't be at those initial talks. Putin and Trump meeting in the past has been a bit of a black box, a roll of the dice as to what these two personalities conjure up. It sounds like Trump is piling on the pressure, talking about the possibility of a short shrift meeting quickly afterwards with Zelensky, Trump and Putin. But remember, all of this was proposed back in May in Istanbul, and Putin rejected it. Trump said Putin rejected the idea of Zelensky's attendance at this first meeting. Will he suddenly agree to it? Unclear. His forces are making progress on the front lines here, Lynda.
Okay, Nick, I want to go to Betsy because we know that President Trump initially said he'll know within minutes whether he can get a deal with the Russian president. Now he's saying, or at least the White House is saying, that this is just a listening summit, and hinted at a possible follow-up involving Ukraine. Is this a shift in expectations? Are they lowering the bar?
I think they're certainly trying to minimize expectations that there will be a full ceasefire coming out of this very high stakes meeting on Friday. But I want to circle back to something Nick just mentioned, that the German chancellor said following that very critical call between President Trump and his European counterparts along with Ukrainian President Zelensky. Merz said that they are expecting, quote, major decisions to be made on Friday in Alaska. So the president now telling reporters that this meeting is essentially, quote, setting the table for what could potentially be a second meeting with Putin and Zelensky together at another location. The president said if this goes well and if he gets the answers that he wants, there will be a quick second meeting, and he would like to do it, quote, almost immediately. He also warned that there will be very severe consequences if Putin does not express openness toward achieving some sort of peace deal, but he declined to say whether that would take the form of sanctions or tariffs when pressed. Now, of course, European allies have expressed so much concern to the White House, to President Trump, along with Vice President J.D. Vance, about the possibility of requiring Ukraine to cede territory in any potential deal. They have also advocated strongly for Ukraine to have a seat at the negotiating table. The White House, with this very quickly arranged call this morning, seeking to send some reassurances to the United States European allies. But as you mentioned, they are characterizing this upcoming summit in Anchorage as, quote, a listening exercise. The White House press secretary Caroline Leavitt says that President Trump wants to get a better understanding of where President Putin stands.
I think we might have just lost our link with Betsy Klein, but there she was explaining some of the expectations of this summit in Alaska between the Russian president and the U.S. president. I want to thank Nick Payton-Walsh for us in Kyiv and Betsy Klein at the White House. We are going to stay on this story. I want to welcome Oleksandr Merezhko. He is a member of the Ukrainian parliament and the chair of its Foreign Affairs Committee. He joins us now live from Kyiv. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you for inviting me.
I want to start first with what role you believe this upcoming summit between Trump and Putin in Alaska might have in shaping the international response to the war, and whether or not you're optimistic about any potential breakthrough.
I'm rather pessimistic, or I prefer to say realistic, about the possible outcome of this summit. I don't believe that there will be any tangible outcome for a very simple reason, because Putin has not abandoned his ultimate goal to subjugate and destroy Ukraine. He hasn't abandoned his ultimatum. He continues to insist on this ultimatum, and he will be trying to deceive President Trump. And there is a danger in this summit. First of all, Putin has already been rewarded by the summit instead of being punished by tariffs and sanctions. And unfortunately, the second reason is that Putin will be trying to put forward those suggestions, those proposals which will be absolutely unacceptable to Ukraine, and he will try to persuade President Trump that the blame should be put on Ukraine instead of Russia. And I see a huge danger in that.
And of course, Trump is now downplaying this first meeting, calling it just a listening summit and hinting at the possibility of Ukraine being at the table for a follow-up meeting. What strategic significance would that Ukrainian presence have in any sort of negotiations going forward?
Well, first of all, we hope that President Trump will continue to honor the basic principle, nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine. It's tremendously important because the fate of our country cannot be solved without us, without a participation of our president. And additionally, since the issue of Ukraine is not only issue of Ukraine, but also issue of European security, our European allies should be also present at the table of negotiations. It would create guarantees against Putin, against his provocations and attempts to create traps into which, unfortunately, President Trump can fall.
And of course, there are these worrying signs about territorial swaps, and we heard that from Chancellor Merz, saying that, Ukraine could be forced into a compromise after this Alaska summit in terms of a deal. And as we are approaching this summit, Russia is escalating its attacks on Ukraine. We just got some stats out from the United Nations that said in July, the highest number of civilians killed in Ukraine since May of 2022. That number, 286 civilians killed. I want to get a sense from you of the mood in Ukraine going into these talks, given what you're seeing on the ground there.
Well, of course, Putin, as a terrorist, he is trying to, by these attacks, by these shellings and bombardments of capital of Ukraine and other cities, he is trying to terrorize us into submission. He is trying to break our will to resistance. But he has failed. He has failed so far due to our resilience, of course, our population, due to determination of our president, our parliament, our people, and due to support of our closest European allies.
President Trump has again made threats of severe consequences. We've heard talk of, further secondary sanctions, particularly those on countries buying oil from Russia that will come into effect in the coming weeks. From a Ukrainian perspective, how effective are those sort of threats, those sort of sanctions, and what else can be done?
Well, first of all, it's a high time for President Trump to finally deliver on his promises, and he made several promises, and we're still waiting for his resolve. As for effectiveness, yes, these sanctions are very effective, but the final goal is how to stop Russian war machine and Russian war economy, which is provided sort of lifeline from those countries which buy Russian oil and gas. And the problem is, and the issue is, how to stop Russian war machine by imposing secondary sanctions on those companies and countries which help Russian economy to survive and to continue to kill Ukrainians.
Given so much talk about land swaps and territorial concessions going into this Alaska summit, from your perspective, what red lines are non-negotiable?
Well, first of all, even from a moral point of view, we cannot talk about any territorial swaps for a very simple reason. It's not only about territory, it's about people living in villages, in towns, in cities. How can we sacrifice those people knowing what had happened in Bucha, in Irpin? We cannot do it from a moral perspective. From legal perspective, territorial swaps are also impossible because it's against our constitution. It's against principle of territorial integrity of Ukraine, on which our constitution and state is based upon. So it's impossible also from international legal perspective because it would undermine global security and international law.
Oleksandr Merezhko, Ukrainian lawmaker, we appreciate your time and perspective. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Well, still to come tonight, a new era for the Kennedy Center and possibly the Smithsonian Museums. We'll look at President Trump's cultural overhaul in Washington the same week as his crime crackdown. And later, a new report that Israel is in talks to resettle Palestinians in Gaza a continent away from their homeland.